Hi, my name is Kelly Phillips, and I'm one of the in-district instructors for the Center for Skillful Teaching and Leading. And this video is designed to help you use your Analyst Toolkit when you are observing and analyzing teaching to be able to provide teachers with feedback. If you don't already, it's probably going to be helpful if you have at least these three tools nearby during this video. You'll want your copy of the Skillful Teacher text, you'll want your copy of the Analyst Toolkit, and then also the criteria for success for a written report. If you don't have these, you might want to pause the video now and then come on back. Okay, here are our objectives. By the end of the video, the idea is that you'll be able to make connections between the Analyst Toolkit, the Skillful Teacher text, as well as the knowledge base on teaching. You'll also be able to use this toolkit as a structure to help you write your Claim, Evidence, and Impact, or CEI paragraphs. This is our itinerary, or our roadmap of how we'll get there. First, we'll take a look and really examine the toolkit and how it relates to the Skillful Teacher, and then we'll zoom in on each page of the toolkit, and then we'll go even deeper and explore how to use the toolkit to identify the language for labeling claims and evidence in a CEI paragraph for a report. So one way you can think about the Analyst Toolkit is almost an outline of the Skillful Teacher text. If you take a look at the table of contents and compare that with your Analyst Toolkit, you'll see there are a lot of things in common, word for word. It's obviously all related to the pedagogy of knowledge that we have in the knowledge base. Each area of performance, is a chapter in the Skillful Teacher text, and you will also see those areas of performance in your Analyst Toolkit. And this toolkit on 4 pages really helps provide us with that common language that we want to use with teachers to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about skillful moves in teaching. So let's take a quick crosswalk with the knowledge base on teaching in our toolkit. So if you look starting from the bottom, again, we know that this is not a hierarchical triangle. But this is one way of designing it. The only thing that really is hierarchical is that foundation of essential beliefs at the bottom. And then after that, we have all these different areas of performance. And we know that teachers need to have lots of different skills in each one to be able to match them to their setting. So you see that these are also divided into 4 categories. We have management at the base of the triangle, and you'll see that in your Analyst Toolkit, that's on page 50. Then we have instructional strategies in the green area in the middle. Instructional strategies, we have 2 different pages for that in the toolkit, pages 51 and 52, and we'll talk about that more later. Then climbing up the triangle, you see motivation in blue. That's another page on page 53. And then the top of the triangle, that's all about curriculum planning. And you'll see those same areas of performance on page 54. So let's zoom in on each one at a time. First of all, let's take a look at management at the base. You'll see management on page 50. If you look at your toolkit, you will see these same 6 areas of performance that you see in the triangle: attention, momentum, space, time, routines, and discipline. You will also see under those additional bullets with key language from the Skillful Teacher. One thing that we want you to think about is we want you to take, if you haven't done it yet, draw a line through that title of management. Don't black it out completely. We want to make sure that you know that this is all about management on this page. But you're not going to be writing any claims just about management. That is too broad. It's too broad to give teachers any meaningful feedback. If you say the management was great, teachers really aren't able to be reflective on their moves. Another note about management. Generally, we only write CEI paragraphs about management if we're working with a brand new teacher or a teacher who has been working on some certain management skills to try to change something differently in the room, or if management is an area of concern. We really try to think about, if we've got skillful teachers in the room, then management is standard operating procedure. So we're really only writing about it when it's something new or something that we really want the teacher to be working on more carefully. So let's move now to instructional strategies. You see instructional strategies in the green area of our knowledge base. And you see that we have 2 pages of instructional strategies in the Analyst Toolkit. We have 1 page, page 51, that's all about clarity. And then on page 52, you'll see principles of learning and models of teaching. Again, the same way of management, we are not going to use instructional strategies in our language as a claim. Much too broad. Teachers are not going to be able to hone in on what they did well or where they could improve if we've got something that's that broad. In addition, we're not going to use clarity as a claim. That is an area of performance, and there are all the other areas of performance can be written about in some circumstance or another, but clarity is still too broad. It's the longest chapter in the Skillful Teacher, and try to imagine a class with no clarity. Teachers aren't going to be teaching anything, and students aren't going to be learning anything. So when we're talking about clarity moves, we'll be going more deeply, and I'll show that in a minute. Then again, we have the principles of learning, models of teaching, which you share on page 52, and those can be claims in and of themselves. So if you look at this clarity page on page 51, and again, you might want to draw a line through that one because you are not going to make a claim that is that broad or general. You see these different areas underneath that: framing the learning, presenting information, speech, supporting mental engagement, getting inside students' heads, also known as cognitive empathy, and anchoring the learning. These are all areas where claims could be written. Then, on page 52, you'll see the principles of learning and models of teaching. Principles of learning are organized around 24 different research-based contributors to learning. Very often, teachers use them intuitively without even knowing it. And remember, part of our job in giving teachers feedback is to help them be more intentional and purposeful about what they're doing. These principles of learning all increase the rate and the durability of students' learning, and you might see several of them going on at any time in a lesson. You really want to concentrate on reading chapter 12 in the Skillful Teacher to familiarize yourself with these principles. The models of teaching are all patterns of teaching that are recognizable and consistent. When you go into a room, you can see this model of teaching in place. These are all about teaching students how to learn and think in different ways. Again, you'll want to review this carefully in chapter 13 of the Skillful Teacher to be familiar with them. And if ever you feel like you're going to be writing a claim about them, definitely go back to these chapters to make sure you're being more specific. Okay, a note about instructional strategies. You know from your criteria for success for report, every report must have at least one CEI paragraph about an area of instruction. It could come from the clarity page, or it could come from principles of learning and models of teaching. Okay, let's take a look at motivation now. And you'll find motivation on page 53 of your Analyst Toolkit. And it has these different areas: the personal relationship building, standards with expectations, and also class climate. Again, as we had before, draw a line through that title. Motivation is too broad for teachers to be able to receive meaningful feedback. Instead, we're going to be writing about standards or expectations, personal relationship building, or classroom climate. And just as with instruction, you know from your criteria for success for report that every report must have at least one CEI paragraph about an area for motivation. Let's take a look now at the curriculum planning page. That's on page 54 of your Analyst Toolkit. And on the curriculum planning page, you will see objectives, differentiated instruction, planning, and assessment. So here's the deal. Again, you know from the criteria for a report that we already write about the objectives and the planning in the lesson paragraph. Differentiated instruction might also be in the lesson paragraph. It could also fit in with motivation, expectations, or instruction and explanatory devices. So generally, we do not write claims about these in a report. Assessment, we also see it in the report. We see it in the lesson paragraph with the data on mastery, as well as the post-observation conference report. However, so there it is, addressed in the last sentence of the paragraph in the conference report and mastery. However, sometimes administrators really want anybody who's observing, analyzing, teaching to write to all four standards. And while there are other ways you could see assessment, the fourth standard about assessing, analyzing, and adapting instruction may not be as easy to see in a regular lesson, and the language on the curriculum planning sheet could help you with that. So this might be the one area where we make claims from the curriculum page. So again, notes about curriculum. Generally, we are not writing from this page. Exceptions would include, again, looking at that assessment area performance. You also might be in a situation where you're watching a team meeting and teachers are creating or adapting curricula. In that case, other areas would be very pertinent. All right, so we have taken a look at each page of the toolkit. Now we're going to move to using this toolkit. How are we going to identify language to label claims and evidence in the CEI paragraphs that we write? So you know, again, from your criteria, that in every CEI, each claim and each piece of evidence needs to be labeled with skillful teacher language. It all depends on what is seen in the classroom, what's going on with the students as well as with the teacher. It could be more general or more specific, but regardless, the language must be aligned. So we're going to walk through an example to see how that could work for you. Imagine that you visited a classroom and you saw the students were making really strong mental connections to what they were learning and what they were doing. And in your scripted notes, you've captured evidence that the teacher was really clear and explicit and purposeful in helping the students focus and to make those cognitive connections. So we know this is not about motivation or management. This is about instruction. And more specifically, it's about clarity. So we want to be looking at page 51 of our Analyst Toolkit. But we know we're not writing a claim about instruction or clarity because they're too broad. So where do we go next? As you go through the page on clarity, you'll see number 3, supporting mental engagement. And under supporting mental engagement, you see all sorts of things about explicitness and making cognitive connections. So when we're thinking about the classroom that we just imagined, this is really what we're talking about. Things have gone on in this area. So we have some choices. It could be, for a claim, the teacher supported students' mental engagement, and that claim is completely valid. It's one of our broader options when we're looking at it. So supporting mental engagement at the top. If we do that, the teacher supported students' mental engagement, then all of our evidence can come from any of these bullets underneath and be labeled with any one of these. So we might have some from explicitness, we may have some from cognitive connections. We could get more specific. Let's say what we really saw, the big impact, what was really salient in the classroom, was the teacher facilitating students making cognitive connections. And if that's the case, we're only looking at the evidence underneath cognitive connections. We're not looking at the things under explicitness. We're not talking about evidence of focus of questions or necessary steps and directions. If our claim is the teacher facilitated students making cognitive connections, each piece of evidence underneath that will be involved with one of these pieces, these labels from the green box. We can get even more specific. There are times when a teacher may have really focused on trying to make it relatable to the student's own experiences, in which case you could make a claim that was as narrow as the teacher showed resemblance to student experience. If that's the case, where are we going to get the language to label the evidence? Because there aren't any sub-bullets under that, you're going to go to the skillful teacher. Okay. Within that text, you are going to see more explicit information to help you get that language, to communicate with teachers the purposeful strategies that will be going on there. All right, how do you know if you're going to make a claim that's more broad or more narrow? That depends totally on your evidence and also the teacher's need for feedback. If the teacher is really honing in on something specific, it might be more narrow. If you saw one thing the teacher did that was really specific, it might be more narrow, or it could be more broad. So let's take a look, keeping with the same example in mind, of how we might be actually writing these CEI paragraphs. So if we have that most broad one that we started with, the teacher supported students' mental engagement, we might have one piece of evidence that really had to do with focus of questions. So that could be labeled, he was explicit with his focus of questions when he and then you would have the quote for one or some of the questions that the teacher gave. The next piece of evidence might be labeled with, he showed resemblance to student experience when he, and again, some quotes and evidence from your notes. And finally, you might have one from foreshadowing. He foreshadowed when he, again, your quotes and evidence. So that's what a CEI, at least the CE part, would look like if you were being a little bit more broad in the situation. Again, totally appropriate depending on your evidence, what you saw in the classroom for teachers, for students, and what the teachers need. You can get a little bit more specific, right? So if we're going to that second claim we talked about, the teacher facilitated students making cognitive connections. Now, each piece of evidence needs to be labeled from underneath that part of it, okay, from under the making cognitive connections part. So it might be, again, he showed resemblance to student experience when he, and you have your quote or evidence. He made transitions between ideas when he, with your quote or evidence. And he foreshadowed when he, and you have your quotes or evidence. That's another option of providing meaningful feedback to teachers under this larger area of supporting mental engagement, but getting more specific about making cognitive connections. And again, we talked earlier that it could be even more narrow, where the teacher really was focused on showing resemblance to student experience. For that, you're going to go into the Skillful Teacher. If you take a look at your Analyst Toolkit, it tells you exactly the page number to go to, page 242. So you're going to spend a little bit of time reading page 242 to 254. If you want to do that now, go ahead, take a look, pause the video, and it might be more meaningful when you come back to take a look at the next example. Okay, so if we are getting to that more refined level, that more specific level, the teacher showed resemblance to student experience, then each piece of evidence will be labeled from the Skillful Teacher, right? So when in the Skillful Teacher, start on page 242, and there's a couple of pages afterwards. Some of the things they talk about are helping students to see that the new learning wasn't really so different. So that could be a labeled piece of evidence. Also helping students to make associations before starting a lesson. Or the third one, helping students create a reference point for the new learning. In each case, you're still looking at language from the Skillful Teacher. It's just not specified on the Analyst Toolkit. So when you get to this level, go back into the text, make sure that we're pulling out things that are really accurate to the research and pedagogy for teaching, and you can provide teachers with this sorts of language to help them understand and reflect on their experience. So when you're writing your claim, it's all about the matching. What was the impact on students? What did we see going on in the room for the students? It's about the data that you collect in your literal notes. What are the quotes that you have? What happened? What was seen? And then also the value to teaching practice. Remember, this process is all about helping teachers to refine and enhance their practice of teaching and their students' learning. So what's the next step in learning for the teacher? That's what's going to help you decide how broad or how narrow to make your claim. So a quick summary of the video. Our Analyst Toolkit is designed to help us organize feedback to teachers with that common language so that we all know what we're talking about when we're trying to improve teaching and learning. And that common language comes from the Skillful Teacher. The toolkit is very similar to an overview or an outline of the table of contents. Remember that claims and evidence must be labeled with TST language, and most of that language can come just from those 4 pages. It helps us to make sure that it's not only labeled with the language, but that it aligns and falls under the correct areas. When in doubt, go back to the full text in the Skillful Teacher. Make sure you understand what each piece is really trying to describe for teachers. And if you have questions, contact your own instructor. We're always ready and willing and wanting to help you make sense of the feedback that you give to teachers. Because remember, your feedback makes a difference. Every child deserves an expert teacher, and your feedback can help get teachers there. Thanks very much for watching. Enjoy using the Analyst Toolkit, keep it by your side, and keep making a difference for kids. Thank you.